Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari. And Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari. Yashodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana. Yashodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana. Yamunatira Vanachari. Jamunatira Vanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jai Mr. Paramahansa Buddhacharya Ashtottara the Sri Srimad the Divine Grace Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada ki Jai. ISKCON BBT Founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada ki Jai. Jai Vishnupad Paramahansa Buddhacharya Ashtottara the Sri Srimad the Divine Grace Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur ki Jai. Ananda Koti Vaishnavinda ki Jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur ki Jai. Srimad Bhagavad Gita ki Jai, Samaveda Bhaktivinoda ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glory to Shri Guru and Gauranga. So, today's class title, this is the order of the YouTube, that's why we're doing this, is The Qualities of Pure Devotees. Conclusion. Become very dear to Krishna by following the bhakti path with great faith. Hare Krishna. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. On this 22nd day of June 2021 in San Diego, we're reading from Srimad Bhagavad Gita as it is, translation and commentary by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. And we are concluding chapter 12 tonight, entitled Devotional Service. The text number is 20 and the page 527. Ye tu dharmamritam idam yatoktam payupasate ye tu dharmamritamidam yatoktam payupasate shaddadhana matparama bhaktaste ativame priyaha Shaddadhana matparama bhaktaste tivame priyaha. Ye tu dharmamitamidam yatoktam payupasate shaddadhana matparama bhaktaste tivame priyaha. Ye tu dharmamitamidam Yatoktam Payupasate Shaddhana Matpadama Bhaktaste Tiva Me Priyaha. Yatoktam Payupasate Bhaktaste Tiva Me Priyaha. Yetu dharmamritamidam Yatoktam Payupasate Atudana Matpadama Bhaktaste Diva Me Priyaha. Yetu dharmamritamidam Yatoktam Payupasate Shaddhana Matpadama Bhaktaste Tiva Me Priyaha. Yea, those who to but dharma of religion, amritam, nectar, idam, this, yatha, as uktam, said, payupasate, completely engage, shaddhanaha, with faith, matpadamaha, taking me, the Supreme Lord, as everything, bhaktaha, devotees, te, they, ativa, very, very, me, to me, priyaha, dear. Okay. Translation. Those who follow this imperishable path of devotional service and who completely engage themselves with faith, making me the supreme goal, are very, very dear to me. Purport. In this chapter, from verse 2 through the end, from my aveshamano ye mam, fixing the mind on me, through yetu dharmamitamidam, this religion of eternal engagement, the Supreme Lord has explained the processes of transcendental service for approaching Him. Such processes are very dear to the Lord, and He accepts a person engaged in them. The question of who is better, one who is engaged in the path of impersonal Brahman, or one who is engaged in the personal service of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, was raised by Arjuna, and the Lord replied to him so explicitly that there is no doubt that devotional service to the Personality of Godhead is the best of all processes of spiritual realization. In other words, in this chapter it is decided that through good association one develops attachment for pure devotional service, and thereby accepts a bona fide spiritual master, and from him begins to hear and chant and observe the regulative principles of devotional service with faith, attachment, and devotion, and thus becomes engaged in the transcendental service of the Lord. This path is recommended in this chapter. Therefore, there is no doubt that devotional service is the only absolute path for self-realization, for the attainment of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The impersonal conception of the Supreme Absolute Truth, as described in this chapter, is recommended only up to the time one surrenders himself for self-realization. In other words, as long as one does not have the chance to associate with a pure devotee, the impersonal conception may be beneficial. In the impersonal conception of the Absolute Truth, one works without fruit or result, meditates and cultivates knowledge to understand spirit and matter. This is necessary as long as one is not in the association of a pure devotee. Fortunately, if one develops directly a desire to engage in Krishna consciousness in pure devotional service, he does not need to undergo step-by-step improvements in spiritual realization. Devotional service, as described in the middle 6 chapters of the Bhagavad Gita, is more congenial. One need not bother about materials to keep body and soul together, because by the grace of the Lord, everything is carried out automatically. Om Jnana Timarandasya Jnanandana Shalakaya Chakshu Unmidatam Mena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. I was born in the darkness of ignorance, but my spiritual master Srila Prabhupada opened my eyes with the torchlight of knowledge. I offer my humble obeisances unto him and to all members of Sri Parampara. So the first point here is to understand the structure here of the Bhagavad Gita, as Srila Prabhupada is indicating to us. As he says elsewhere, but he indicates here, that there's these 3 sections of the Bhagavad Gita. The first 6 chapters, the second 6 chapters, and the last 6 chapters. And the middle 6 chapters are the essence. It's not that there's nothing important in the latter 6 chapters in the first chapter, or the first 6 chapters, but the whole Bhagavad Gita keys on this statement at the end here. One who follows this imperishable path, this nectar, Dharma Amritam, that I've just described, with faith, making me the ultimate goal of life, is very, very dear to me. Now we should remember that the whole goal of this process is to become dear to Krishna. In other words, to develop love for Krishna. I was just reading in the Madhya Lila of the Chaitanya Charitamrita that the goal of Lord Chaitanya is talking to the Tattvavadis. Now the Tattvavadis may not mean so much to us, but they're a distinct part of the line coming down from Madhvacharya, which is our line. We're known as the Brahma Madhva Gaudiya Sampradaya. Lord Chaitanya, he of course took initiation in that line from Ishvara Puri, who is a disciple of Madhavendra Puri, who belonged to the Madhva line. But Madhavendra Puri, as you may be aware, introduced something very unique, which hadn't been there in the Madhva line, and that was the worship of Radha and Krishna in the mood of separation, which is exactly what Lord Chaitanya exalted as the highest goal. And so there's kind of even though we're part of the Madhva Sampradaya, we're distinctly Madhva Gaudiya Sampradaya, because you do have these Tattvavadis who they worship Lakshmi Narayan, and they accept the form of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, unlike the Mayavadis, who they're not Bhaktas at all, they're not Vaishnava. But they exalt the Varnashram Dharma and worshipping the Lord through following, this official path of doing one's duties within the Varnashram. And so Lord Chaitanya, he said, no, this is not the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is not mukti. The ultimate goal is not even going back to Godhead. The ultimate goal is prema. And the highest devotees you'll find, we don't care whether we take birth in, heaven or hell, or in the, or as an insect, as long as it's in the house of a devotee, and we can have pure love for Krishna. All right, we're going to have to deal with some cross sound. What is going on? Something on the altar? I don't know. Anyway, so this is the end of the middle 6 chapters, right? We're going to launch into the 13th chapter. That's the final 6 chapters. So what we're going to hear from there here on in is more details about subjects we've already heard about. The soul and the body. This is what it starts out in the 13th chapter. The Chaitra and the Chaitragya. Chaitra being the body and the Chaitragya being the soul. The 3 modes of nature. We've heard about them already. We'll have a whole chapter on that. So he gives more details. And in the end, he comes back to the whole, point. Manmana bhava madbhakto and sarva dharma parijajya. So that's just his way of a prefix here. One other thing I wanted to point out. So Prabhupada talks about, he kind of summarizes the process how one achieves perfection. And he keeps emphasizing association with the pure devotee, association with the pure devotee. As long as one doesn't get that association, then if he's following the path of what does he call it here? Impersonal path, which involves austerities, understanding the difference between the mind and the body and all these things. This can help one kind of lay the ground for the point in which you come in contact with a pure devotee. And actually, you look at the way this movement grew in America. The way Prabhupada was able to plant the seed. He really did encounter some people who were on an impersonal path. In that first group, that fertile group that he encountered in Lower Manhattan in the mid to late 60s, right? So what were they into? Why were they drawn? Why were they particularly drawn to that? Well, they were already speculating. They were going here and there. They were reading the autobiography of a yogi and this and that, And a lot of it was impersonal. Buddhism was very strong then. I remember I was, in that same culture, although I didn't come till later. But there was the idea of a personal God that immediately called to mind things that we were rejecting. The whole rigid, established religion in America there, and we didn't want that, There was a rebellion against that. But to actually come back to that point of worshiping a personal God and surrendering and all of that, that was definitely a challenge for them. But Srila Prabhupada presented it in such an attractive way, and the chanting of the holy name, they came in touch with the pure devotee, and he gave them the process, and enough of them were ready to surrender to that process to realize the superiority of the personal versus the impersonal. So they were illustrating the truth of this purport that Prabhupada directly experienced, and he's giving the Siddhanta here. So there's all these preliminary things. Now it also echoes the way in which the Bhagavatam was written. You remember that Vyasadeva had written all these other literatures, the Puranas, he'd written the Vedanta Sutra, he'd written the Mahabharata, which contains the Bhagavad Gita, and all these Upanishads and everything, but he wasn't satisfied. So he'd been writing, the Vedas, which contain Karma Kanda, and which they contain a whole Jnana Kanda, separating the spirit and matter and all these things, where the final goal is mukti, 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 But he wasn't satisfied because he hadn't sufficiently glorified Krishna and Bhakti. This comes out with studying Narada Muni's instructions. The King Prachanabarishat, right? That whole allegory, that's all Narada Muni speaking, right? And now he just finished instructions to the sons of Prachanabarishat, the Prachetas. So Narada Muni plays a very prominent role in the whole Bhagavatam. So his very first instruction to Vyasadeva, he appears right in the 5th chapter there in the 1st canto, and he, after writing all of this stuff, he's saying, Nayad vachas chitta padang hare yasho jagat pavitram paganita karachit. So that creation, that literary creation, which does not glorify the Lord, who purifies the whole universe, purifying Lord, is like a place of pilgrimage for crows. It's a polite way of saying a garbage heap, which is pretty radical. I mean, he's talking about Mahabharata after all, I mean, all the things that he wrote, this is why he wasn't satisfied. He didn't sufficiently glorify. Now, there's obviously Bhakti in the Mahabharata, we're reading it. But it wasn't wholly and solely, and it didn't emphasize enough. So the Bhagavatam is wholly solely about Bhakti from the very beginning. And it's very dear to the Vaishnavas, because you can't screw out any other, interpretation. Whereas from the others, you can try to do it. So this is, if we can take up this process as it's been given to us, as Krishna describes here, we can meet these characteristics, we can become very dear to him. And if you become very dear to Krishna, your life is perfect. That's it, We're always dear to him, but we're kind of wayward children. We've wandered away. We've forgotten all about our dear friend, our master, even though he's staying with us all the time, We insist on trying to enjoy separately. So we're dear, but we're kind of there's something called tough love. Have you heard about tough love? No. Maybe you had some tough love. So your parents love you, but they realize we can't pamper this boy anymore. We have to we'll send him to the soldiers' camp, right, for training. So that's what this material world is. It's love, but it's tough love. That's why we're getting punished, and there's so much, misery here. But as soon as we start to give up our independent streak and come back to Krishna and approach him in the proper way through his representatives, then there's so much relief from the suffering, because it's all based on identifying with the body. And it's also based on having cut off that channel of that nectar that comes from bhakti. Even in the beginning stages, you can taste it, you get a taste for it. That's really the source of pleasure. So then, you start on this path, and it's a path of rehabilitation, it's a path of resurrection, if you want to say, resurrecting our original love for Krishna. What is that verse? Nitya siddha Krishna prema sadhya kabunoi, shovanadi shuddha chitte koriya udoi. That Lord Chaitanya told Sanatana Goswami, the eternal perfection of prema, love for Krishna, is always there within the living entity. Sadhyakapanoi. It's not something that has to be brought from the outside. It's not something artificial that you attain by developing some artificial skill. You're just uncovering what's already there. And what's the means? Hearing, etc. Hearing and chanting and so on. But Shravana Adi means etc. Shuddha Chitte, purification of the heart. What happens? Kariya Udoi. That natural love automatically awakens. So that's very encouraging. It means nobody's disqualified. If you take to the process sincerely, you'll start to, tremendous purification takes place. Even we don't understand how it's happening. And if you do it right, you'll begin to feel, a great weight, coming off your shoulders, trying to enjoy separately from Krishna. And really, realizing that you don't need so many external things in order to be happy. What you basically need is just the proper association and the training and the determination to chant the holy name and do all the things that we know we should do. So that's this Dharma, this nectar Dharma, eternal Dharma that's mentioned here. Dharma Amritam Idam, we've been given it, and we should proceed with it. Okay, I'm going to end there the first installment of our little class. And anyone have any questions here, comments? Okay. Vijay Krishna Prabhu?
Hare Krishna, Dravida Prabhu. I have my question.
Good, I'm ready for you.
So, thank you, Prabhu. The quote is as follows. It is exactly the last sentence of the purport. Quote, one need not bother about materials to keep body and soul together, because by the grace of the Lord, everything is carried out automatically. So, Prabhu, knowing that the chapter number 3, entitled Karma Yoga, says in text 8, perform your prescribed duty, for doing so is better than not working.
Yeah.
One cannot even maintain one's physical body without work.
Right.
So if we have to work, my question is as follows. What is the meaning of this last sentence of the purpose you chose for us today? Is it that, for example, if I become a devotee and then I stop paying my rent, stop collecting the money for the payment of my rent, is it that just like if I may say it, a trick of magic due to the mercy of Lord Krishna, the Lakshmi will manifest for me to pay my rent? Because the expression here is one need not bother about materials to keep body and soul together. In what measure should we not need not bother about materials to keep body and soul together after becoming a devotee?
Yes, I'm glad you asked that question. So the idea is you have to see everything in context. Fortunately, if one develops directly a desire to engage in Krishna consciousness in pure devotional service, he does not need to undergo step-by-step improvements in spiritual realization. Devotional service, as described in the middle 6 chapters of Bhagavad Gita, is more congenial. And then comes the sentence at the end here, which is you're puzzling you. One need not bother about materials to keep body and soul together, because by the grace of the Lord everything is carried out automatically. Now, you may recall in the 9th chapter, you remember there's a whole section there on demigod worship. Krishna describes there how how's it go? Those who worship me indirectly, they the knowers of the 3 Vedas. I'm going to pick it up in a second. Yes. Someone knows the number, they can give it to me. 330? I don't think so. This is in chapter 9, where Krishna ends up saying, Ananyas chintayanto mam. Here it is, text 20, page 400. He's saying, Trividyamam somapaputapapa. Those who study the Vedas, drink the soma juice, seeking the heavenly planets, worship me indirectly. Purified of sinful reactions, they take birth on the pious heavenly planets of Indra, where they enjoy godly delights. When they have thus enjoyed vast heavenly sense pleasure, and the results of their pious activities are exhausted, they return to this mortal planet again. Thus those who seek sense enjoyment by adhering to the principles of the three Vedas achieve only repeated birth and death. And then comes the verse I wanted to call your attention to. But those who always worship me with exclusive devotion, meditating on my transcendental form, to them I carry what they lack and I preserve what they have. This phrase, yoga kshemam bahamyaham, is integral to what Prabhupada is describing at the end of this 12th chapter. And that is that, so is this caveat, ananyas chintayanto mam. In other words, he's talking about those whose mind is completely fixed on me here, without no other object. Worship me. Nitya, you'll be always linked to me in devotional service. To them, I personally provide their necessities and their security. This is what yoga kshema means. And this is what Prabhupada is describing here. Now, before we read the sentence at the end of the purport, Prabhupada is describing the pure devotional service. Engaged in pure devotional service, he does not need to undergo step-by-step improvements in spiritual realization. Now, one thing is to remember, Vijay, is that all of this is, when Prabhupada talks repeatedly here about meeting a pure devotee, so he's always talking about surrendering to a pure devotee. So within the context of our larger, Krishna family here, this ISKCON, which is now hundreds of thousands of, I don't know if there's hundreds of thousands of initiated devotees, but certainly the larger community. So clearly, the large majority of them are not living in the temple, and they're having to maintain outside somehow. They may be initiated, they may be very sincere, they may be doing a lot of service, but they have to maintain, and I think that's what you're referring to. So that can be very much within the context of following the instructions of the spiritual master and really making that part of devotional service. You see what I'm saying? So the opportunity to engage in devotional service, which of course requires maintenance of one's body and soul together. If you're not completely dependent on a temple environment, which is an ashram situation, then that's also part of the way in which Krishna provides. You know what I'm saying? It's not outside of that, but one has to remember that. If you maintain a separatist mentality, and you think I do my bhakti on when I come to the temple, otherwise I got to do my job, and it's not really part of my bhakti, then you're going to it'll slow up your advancement. So what Prabhupada is mentioning here, this is the platform that he himself experienced, right? He came to America completely dependent on Krishna. He had no money. He had one, contact in Pennsylvania somewhere, and that was it. And somehow, he was able to maintain by simply continuing to try to spread Krishna consciousness. He was protected. And in so many ways, in those 12 years, Krishna protected him, even directly. He had a head-on car crash in Mauritius at one point, and he was injured, not seriously, thank God. And just before the crash happened, he braced himself. It's almost like he could see, it's going to happen. There was one of these things of riding on the left and right side. It was a tourist who was riding on the wrong side of the road, and luckily they weren't going full speed. But the point is, that's just one of the dangers Prabhupada underwent, So he felt this grace for himself, and many devotees also feel that Prabhupada. I heard Prabhupada on a tape. He's describing the artificial famine that the English created in India during the war, World War II, because they needed the Indians to enlist in the army, so that they would fight against the Japanese, who were also part of the Axis. They were right there. They were the ones doing the bombing of Calcutta. So Prabhupada describes how this artificial famine was created. The British bought up all the rice, and they, if you want to buy it in the market, because they're buying it all up, the price went way up. From 70 cents for 80 pounds. Which is inconceivable, to $10 for 80 pounds, which would be very cheap today. But it was impossible. People were starving. So they joined the army. Then they could eat. This thing. So, but then amazingly, Prabhupada said he went around to different Vaishnava families and he found that they were somehow surviving okay. They didn't have a need. Krishna was providing. So there were miraculous things that happen, and in consultation with your spiritual authorities. That's why we all need that. With our guru, how do I balance? This is a classic question in family life. How do I balance my family needs and the work I have to do with devotional service, which I want to do? And striking that balance should always be done under authority, so you're confident it's part of devotional service. I'm not getting deviated. It's in order to live in the world, you have to do that. So that's what I gather from this. If one is completely simply throwing up his hands and saying, "Krishna, protect me, I'm completely surrendered," then that'll happen. But if you're a family man, you have responsibilities. Prabhupada did that for so many years. He was preaching like anything, but also doing his job. He was supporting his family. Finally, that became untenable. You know the story. He wasn't getting support. Sometimes I think we should really thank his wife, for making it impossible for him to do that. And also, when they took over that place in Jhansi, he was ready to start it all in Jhansi. If he succeeded, no America, no Jaladuta. It didn't work out, thank God. Krishna made arrangements so he got on the boat. But whether he was on the boat, with $6, to his name, heading off to an unknown country, or living, in his milieu, which he was comfortable in India, he was still completely dependent on Krishna. And so that's what he's talking about here. It sounds scary. One need not even bother about materials to keep body and soul together. Yes, if you're 100% pure devotee and your only desire is to preach and you're completely just chanting Hare Krishna, somehow or other you'll keep body and soul together. Just like the Goswamis, it comes. But if we're not on that platform, then we have to gradually move toward it. That's what this chapter is all about, actually. Is that if you can't do this, can't do this, do this. But at the end, he's giving 5 or 6 verses here describing the ultimate. Is that okay, Vijay?
Dravida Prabhu, better than okay again. Wonderful answer to my question. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
Okay. So let's proceed. Let's dive into chapter 13. Okay, this chapter is entitled Nature, the Enjoyer, and Consciousness. Arjuna Vacha Prakatim Purusham Chaiva Chaitram Chaitragyameva Etad Vedudam Ichchami Jnanam Geyam Chakeshava Shri Bhagavanu Vacha Idam Shariram Kaunteya Chaitramitya Vidhiyate. Sorry. Etajo Vetitam Prahu Chaitragya iti tadvidaha. Now before I read this translation, I just want us to contemplate a minute, how much trouble Prabhupada went in to put all these transliterations and word-by-word meanings in here, which greatly increases the volume of the book, believe me. You won't find this anywhere, in anyone else who presented the Bhagavad Gita, basically. Because he wanted us to be able to chant the sound, which is so purifying and powerful. And if we really get into it, to learn the meaning. So when you're chanting, the meaning is coming out. It's very auspicious and purifying just to chant and hear the Sanskrit. Arjuna said, "Oh my dear Krishna, I wish to know about Prakriti, nature, Purusha, the enjoyer, and the field and the knower of the field, and of knowledge and the object of knowledge." The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, "This body, O son of Kunti, is called the field, and one who knows this body is called the knower of the field." Arjuna was inquisitive about Prakriti, nature, Purusha, the enjoyer, Chaitra, the field, Chaitragya, its knower, and knowledge and the object of knowledge. When he inquired about all these, Krishna said that this body is called the field, and that one who knows this body is called the knower of the field. This body is the field of activity for the conditioned soul. The conditioned soul is entrapped in material existence, and he attempts to lord it over material nature. And so, according to his capacity to dominate material nature, he gets a field of activity. That field of activity is the body. And what is the body? The body is made of senses. The conditioned soul wants to enjoy sense gratification, and according to his capacity to enjoy sense gratification, he is offered a body or a field of activity. Therefore, the body is called kshetra, or the field of activity for the conditioned soul. Now, the person who should not identify himself with the body is called kshetragya, the knower of the field. It is not very difficult to understand the difference between the field and its knower, the body and the knower of the body. Any person can consider that from childhood to old age, he undergoes so many changes of body, and yet is still one person remaining. Does that ring a bell with anybody? That was his first instruction. Text 13, chapter 2. You can review that later. He refers to it right here. Boy, I'm jumping the gun. Okay. Thus, there is a difference between the knower of the field of activities and the actual field of activities. A living conditioned soul can thus understand that he is different from the body. It is described in the beginning, Dehinosmin, that the living entity is within the body, and that the body is changing from childhood to boyhood, and from boyhood to youth, and from youth to old age. And the person who owns the body knows that the body is changing. The owner is distinctly kshetragya. Sometimes we think, I am happy, I am a man, I am a woman, I am a dog, I am a cat. These are the bodily designations of the knower. But the knower is different from the body. Although we may use many articles, our clothes, etc., we know that we are different from the things used. Similarly, we also understand by a little contemplation that we are different from the body. I or you or anyone else who owns the body is called kshetragya, the knower of the field of activities. And the body is called kshetra, the field of activities itself. In the first 6 chapters of the Bhagavad Gita, the knower of the body, the living entity, and the position by which he can understand the Supreme Lord are described. In the middle 6 chapters of the Bhagavad Gita, the Supreme Personality of Godhead and the relationship between the individual soul and the super soul in regard to devotional service are described. The superior position of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and the subordinate position of the individual soul are definitely defined in these chapters. The living entities are subordinate under all circumstances, but in their forgetfulness they are suffering. When enlightened by pious activities, they approach the Supreme Lord in different capacities, as the distressed, those in want of money, the inquisitive, and those in search of knowledge. That is also described. Now, starting with the 13th chapter, how the living entity comes into contact with material nature, and how he is delivered by the Supreme Lord through the different methods of fruitive activities, cultivation of knowledge, and the discharge of devotional service, are explained. Although the living entity is completely different from the material body, he somehow becomes related. This also is explained. So, as Prabhupada makes clear in this purport, this is material that's already been covered to some degree. Right? We've already, as he refers back to the beginning of the 2nd chapter, there's a whole 20-verse disquisition on the soul and the body and the nature of the soul, And then he goes on. So we've already heard some of this, but we need to hear it again. So Arjuna asked these sixfold question: what is Prakriti? Prakriti means nature. What is the Purusha, the enjoyer? Now this is a bit of a paradox, because the Purusha, ourselves, we're also Prakriti. Remember that? Aparemitastunnyam Prakritim Vidyame Param. In the 7th chapter, we learned, after learning earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence, false ego, these are the material energies. They're dead. They're not. They're lower energy. Apara Prakriti. There's all Para Prakriti, the living entity, right? Who's exploiting or sustaining, actually, everything. We're sustaining the body. As soon as we leave the body, it goes back to dust and whatever. So we're Prakriti by nature, but we're acting like Purusha. That's why we're known as the Purusha, the false enjoyer. Now the Parama Purusha, Krishna, he really is the enjoyer, but we've forgotten him. So that's important. And then the field and the knower of the field. Now there's obviously some overlap here, because The field is Prakriti, that's part of Prakriti. But specifically, how we, the Purusha, false enjoyer, living entity, are living in this field of the body. And the fact that it's a field means that it's a place of activity, a place of enjoyment. Anything that we experience from outside is actually first impinging on our senses, right? If your senses aren't working right, then you cut off from at least portion of your environment here. So everything is actually being experienced within this field. And as soon as we leave this field, we're no longer connected to it, then we have to find another one. And it's already there for us on the material side. You enter another one and who knows, it could be human, subhuman, superhuman, So we keep experiencing ourselves, if we keep identifying with the body, in all these different situations. And actually, you can see how it doesn't really have any meaning. Because whatever we consider important just in relation to the body, it's a huge mistake. It all turns, because Mrityu Sarvahadascham, at the end, Krishna, he just takes away everything. All of our sense of identity and our relationships and our possessions and our it's all taken away. So what's the meaning to it? It's all a huge mistake. It's Maya's, tremendous, I don't want to call it a con, but it, really is a con. It's like it's bewilderment, illusion. So we have to know how that has happened to us and how we can get out of it. And there's one key verse. I always love this verse in this chapter. Forget the number now, 21 or so. Purusha prakatisto hi bhunkte prakati jangunam karanam gunasangosya sadasadyoni janmasu. That the living entity, we as the Purusha, the false enjoyer, we're associating with the modes of nature. Prakriti, we're in Prakriti. Purusha prakatisto hi. Bhunkte means experiences. Prakriti jangunan. We experience the modes of nature generated from this material, from this energy, Prakriti Jangunan. And then the key phrase, Karanam, the cause, Guna Sangosya, how we associate with those modes. Doesn't matter whether we're doing it under knowledge or just doing it under, instinct, reflex. We're associating with the modes of nature. That will determine if it's Sadasadyoni Janmasu. Either good or bad wombs, in other words, good or bad species. Higher human species or lower or even animal or even plant, whatever. We're making our destiny now. And so, suddenly you say, well, I have my destiny in my own hands. How I choose to associate with these modes, that's everything. So that's the very important aspect of this chapter. And we'll learn about that later. Okay. Any questions? Vijay?
Yes, I have a question.
Do you ever not have a question? That's the real question.
Prabhu, if I may,
Please.
The quote is, at least in relation to the edition I'm using, the quote is more or less at the very middle of the last paragraph of the purport. And it goes as follows. The living entities are subordinate under all circumstances, but in their forgetfulness they are suffering. End quote. So, Prabhu, my question is as follows: what is why is it that to go for changing from being subordinate to being the master, because it is well known that to be the master is more comfortable than to be the subordinate? Because the master gets service, and the subordinate gives service. So if we go for changing from being subordinate to being the master, why is it that this is a cause for suffering? Why is it that we are suffering just because we want to change from being subordinate to being the master, when being the master is much more comfortable?
You play the materialist very well there, Vijay. I know you know. Well, first of all, it doesn't say here that the subordinate, the individual soul who is subordinate becomes the master. You can play at being the master, but you're still subordinate to the laws of nature. The problem is that it's a great illusory position, If you read the 10th canto of Bhagavatam, you have these demons, and they're all, you have the whole community of demons. You have Kamsa, and all these. They're thinking they're in charge. I mean, this is the whole idea. Ishvaroham. This is Krishna imitating the demons. We should learn this mantra. Then we should know that we shouldn't really identify with it. Ishvaroham. Aham bhogi. Siddhoham balavan sukhi. I am the master. I am the enjoyer. I am perfect, powerful, and happy. This is the demonic mentality. And you don't have to be a big demon like Kamsa to have it. You can be a small little demon, and still think, I'm the master of this household, don't listen to anybody else, I got my guns, I'll drink this beer as much as I want, So the point is, you think you're the master, you play at being the master, and then you get knocked down by the material energy. We're never the master. But when we act as the master, we can only act as the master of this material energy to some degree. Then we get entangled in the complexities and we suffer like anything. And that's what Prabhupada says. It says, the living entities are subordinate under all circumstances, but in their forgetfulness they are suffering. But in their forgetfulness, they're forgetting they're subordinate. And therefore they're playing at being a master, and it's a unnatural position. So the whole point of bhakti, as you may have noticed, is to take a wrecking ball to that false ego. What's all this bowing down, and living simply, and austerities, not eating? What are you talking about? Fasting from water too? Are you kidding me? In other words, it's totally against this "I'm the enjoyer" mentality. So, when enlightened in pious activities, they approach the Supreme Lord in different capacities. In other words, this is not even pure devotees. This is like chapter 7, is it? I think. Chaturvadha bhajante mam jana sukhatanojana arto jigyasararti jigyani. So I'm suffering. Arti. Arti means someone. I got a disease. Or my wife left me. I can't pay the rent. Whatever. And so I'm coming before you, Krishna. I'm not trying to do it myself. I'm going to go out and rob a bank, and then go to the church. Then you have more suffering, right? So at least if you approach Krishna, you realize, he's a protector. Then you're in the right relationship. But it's just the first step. You have to come to the point of being a jnani, of really inquiring about the truth. Then you become dear to Krishna. And it may take many, many births. Here's one we should all know. Alex, chant it with me. Bahunam janmanam ante Gyanavan mam papadyate Vasudevak sarvamiti samahatma sudurlabha. He knows. So many, many births later, after inquiry, then what happens? You surrender to Vasudev, Krishna. Understanding that he's everything. And I'm nothing. I'm just a part and parcel, little minuscule, infinitesimal particle. So I need shelter. So that's good. That attitude is real. No longer, denying that you're subordinate. Recognizing the reality that we're subordinate, and, declaring us subordinate on the actual master of everything, Krishna, and acting in that capacity. And then, they approach the Supreme Lord in different capacities and so forth. This is also described. So now, the living entity, how he's delivered by the Supreme when we surrender. This was in the 12th chapter. At the beginning, it said, "For those who surrender unto me, I am the swift deliverer from the ocean of birth and death." So it's not a problem, a puzzle. The problem is we deny our real nature. We're living artificially as masters and controllers and enjoyers separate from Krishna. That's the source of all our suffering. When we start to act as his subordinates and do those things and meditate on him and realize our real nature, we suffer less. The suffering goes down, and we begin to really enjoy. In enjoyment that never has to end. As long as we stay on that path and meditate on Krishna and keep chanting the name and chanting the nectar shlokas, we'll keep enjoying like anything. Is that okay, Prabhu?
Oh, again, better than okay. A wonderful answer to my question. Thank you very much, Dravida Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Haribol. Okay, now we have 2 minutes or so. I'm going to end with a couple of nectar shlokas, if you don't mind. One I just shared with Dimitri Prabhu. 2 eyes, by the way. That's the way he spells his name. We should try to honor that. And so you must have memorized it by now. All right, I'll say, you say. Especially the fourth line, we can all join in. Madhuram madhuram vapur asya vibhor. Madhuram madhuram vadanam madhuram. Now here comes the hard line. Madhu gandhi mridu smitame taraho. Mridu smitame. Then all together. Madhuram 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 madhuram. Sweet, sweet is my dear Lord's form. Sweet is still his face so fair. But his honey-scented, gentle smile is sweet beyond compare. Sorry. So we can all chant this verse tomorrow in front of Giri Hari. You'll be very pleased. You'll see. His smile will increase. And your bliss will increase. Okay. All glory to Srila Prabhupada. Hari Hari Bol.